Hey Logan, how are you doing?
Great, how are you?
Perfect, thank you. Logan is pronounced correctly.
Yes, pronounced correctly.
So now, the most important questions. Have you seen the movie Planes, Trains and Automobiles?
I have not, but I have heard about it.
Why I'm asking, you also attended the Chicago Java user group, and by accident, I remember the movie before the Chicago Java user group meeting, and I asked the attendees, but is almost no one knew the movie. And I was a little bit disappointed because the movie is about that, two guys are trying to go back to Chicago to Thanksgiving. And this is actually, yeah, so I was a little bit disappointed. So, okay.
Yeah.
The second most important question is, what was your first computer?
Yeah, I've been expecting this question because I've listened to many of your other episodes. And so for me, my first computer that was just mine was a Dell Inspiron from 2009. But fortunately, growing up, I was able to use my parents' computers, my grandparents' computers. Those were mostly towers, if I remember correctly, some of which were from Dell.
Hmm.
But yeah, Dell Inspiron for me back in 2009.
2009. So you are like a kindergarten kid.
Not quite kindergarten back then. I was in a middle school, but yeah, it was quite a bit ago. Time has flown.
Okay. And it, I mean, it was 2009. I think it was already Pentium, right?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, because I would remember that at least for some PCs, Intel would have the stickers on the actual PC, and I recall mine saying Pentium.
Pentium inside.
Yep.
Okay. What you did with the computer?
Also, good question. I did play games. I wasn't a huge gamer, but there were games online and other sort of online activities. Of course, browsing the web and looking into things that interested me at the time. And then eventually, later on, got into coding, which was a lot of fun.
It's interesting because 2009, I mean, I remember 2006, Java was really modern.
Yeah.
And 2009, this was like modern times. This is when you started.
Yep. Yeah.
Interesting. And, okay, did you have a favorite game back then? Or
Not really. There were a lot of interesting sort of
Mhm.
online, I don't even know if to call them like communities where I guess it's sort of like the precursor to the metaverse where like Nickelodeon, a famous kids channel, would have this sort of like online area where people can go on and play like mini games in this sort of virtual world. And so
Mhm.
I remember doing a lot of that, which was a lot of fun, and then other sort of online games that I found. But later on, I did get like a PlayStation 3 and played some other video games, but on the computer, nothing too major from what I remember
Okay.
correctly.
And PlayStation, what do you enjoyed most?
Back then, I played a lot of wrestling games, WWE, also some
Oh,
sports games, which were a lot
okay.
of fun. But yeah, I was into wrestling back then. I see it every now and again now, but I was big into it back then.
But wrestling is just theater, right? This is not like actual fighting.
Correct.
Okay, because I always
Yeah,
wonder.
correct.
Yeah, but how can you be excited about that if you know that everything is made up?
I don't know. I think, it's really to me, it just is sort of like a soap opera. That's what it
Yeah,
feels like.
it is.
Yeah, the superstars, as they call them, are interesting, and some of the storylines are interesting. But yeah, I don't know. It's just like part of my family got into it when they were young, and sort of got me into it as well. I haven't kept up with it that much recently, as I said, but
No, soap
definitely
opera
watched
is
it
the best
back then.
explanation. So you can watch it like
Yes,
as a movie, right? So it's not like a
yes,
sport, but more like something like a TV show. This,
exactly.
this is what
Yep.
I understand. What I remember, which is funny. Do you understand a little bit German?
I do not, unfortunately. I did not get a chance to take
Okay,
German.
what I remember, there was a wrestler, and his name was Undertaker.
Yes, of course.
And
Yep,
the cool
love
story
Undertaker.
is, at school, if you translate it to German, is Unternehmer because under is unter and take
Hmm.
is nehmen. And Unternehmer in German is like a businessman.
I see.
But
Interesting.
but the actual one by one, but the actual translation is completely different. Undertaker is
Yeah.
someone with works on the cemetery, and
Yes.
but I think I remember as a joke I told someone that Undertaker, if you translate it to German, is Unternehmer, and he told us to teacher, and this was lots of fun. So this was what I can know, like a prank. So this is what I remember from
Yeah.
wrestling.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, and in one point of time, you started coding or scripting or something or nothing.
Yeah, yeah. So I was able to do some sort of web development classes in high school, which, did the usual HTML, CSS, and some PHP. I actually, now that I think of it, was able to start with some of that in middle school with some of the computer classes that we had to take, which was a lot of fun. And so I did some of that, and then really I got into programming when a friend of mine, or a family friend of mine, gave me an Arduino microcontroller for
Oh, cool.
Christmas. And so that got me into the sort of C and Arduino space, and I haven't looked back since.
Okay, I didn't knew that you started with Arduino. At school, you went to school in Chicago area?
Northwest Indiana, which is pretty close to Chicago.
Oh, Indiana sounds nice. So, what is the landscape there? Is like lots of woods, or what is it?
It's the Midwest, so it's pretty flat. There are, woody areas and so on and so forth. But Northwest Indiana is pretty close to Chicago.
Okay.
So it's more of like a suburban area.
And in winter it's cold, right? I guess.
Yes, it's
Okay.
actually incredibly cold right now. It's about 15 degrees Fahrenheit outside.
Okay, if you translate to Celsius, you know what the translation is? No.
Not off the top of my head,
So
unfortunately.
I will put it in the show notes. So okay, and in
Yeah.
the summer it's hot.
Yes, it can get pretty hot. I just looked it up. It's -9 Celsius right
Oh,
now.
there's nothing. So
15 degrees
sometimes
out.
we can have -20, you know. So
Yeah, we did have a very cold Christmas where the wind chill was brutal. But yeah, it can get very cold in the winter and very hot in the summer. I prefer the cold temperatures.
okay. So the at school PHP, you had a server, or every student installed PHP on their machines.
It did run on a server, so as I remember correctly, they sort of had the environment set up for us, and we would write our code. It was relatively simple at the time, and then I do remember we used Dreamweaver as well, which
Adobe.
I think has pretty much fallen out of fashion. Yeah,
Yeah, it was a nice editor. I mean, it was
yeah.
And when was it roughly?
This in middle school, I did the basic HTML and CSS. The nice thing about that is that you could save the HTML file and sort of have those changes reflected locally. And then I believe during freshman and sophomore year, I did the intro to sort of web development classes,
Okay.
and then later on took the more programming focused.
Which year was
classes,
it?
Starting
So
with
just
C++.
roughly. Which year was it?
Yeah. So it would have been 2012.
Okay, so 10 years ago. So I was just curious to know what was the
Yep.
teaching ideas back then.
Yeah.
Okay, Arduino. So you started with C, or what was the language?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, so Arduino is interesting because it's sort of a mix of C and C++. But yeah, I started with that, and then my high school offered a few programming courses, and I actually started with C++ at that time, which was good. I think, knowing all of the power of C and C++ now, I think the teacher in the book did a good job sort of masking you or shielding you from, pointers and memory allocation and whatnot. But yeah, I started with C and C++.
I really enjoyed C++. I think if I get some time, I would like to do something with C++. C in and C out alone, a nice idea with the
Yes.
Yeah, this is what I really enjoyed. And
Yeah.
I remember now you could do the send to files, right? So as I remember, you could use
Yes.
that trick. You can do C in and read something and redirect it to a file. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. We definitely did that. That was part of the intro. Looking back, I don't know. I'm not sure I love the sort of operator overloading with the, shifting operators for
No,
output.
in
It
leisure,
is interesting.
as a hobby leisure
Yeah.
project, absolutely. I mean,
Yes.
on weekend I will overload whatever I can, right? Never in a serious
Yeah.
project, but I mean, just for
Yes.
fun, why not?
Yeah.
I play a lot. Actually, this was actually my major my major programming task was overloading everything. So I think all my operators were overloaded just for fun, so I could do whatever. It was just
Yeah.
almost like a DSL, right? So
Yeah.
cool. So what you did with the Arduino, and I mean, because it's actually hard, right? So if you started with
Yes.
PHP, HTML, and CSS, and then you get Arduino, how old were you back then with Arduino?
I would have been, let's see, that was about 10 years ago, so it would have been like 14 or 15.
Wow. And I mean, why you were so motivated to do this? I mean,
It's a good question. I mean, I just always found it interesting. Like, even growing up, even though I didn't necessarily understand the technologies that were used for certain things, I always found it interesting and was curious about how it worked sort of under the hood. And so Arduino's a good platform, I think, for learning because it lets you do, very simple stuff from like blinking LEDs to
Hmm.
very difficult stuff to like building out big systems and whatnot. So it's a very versatile platform.
Hmm. What you did with it? Was it like interesting project or?
Yeah, so like I mean, I would start off doing basic stuff like, blinking LEDs and changing how quickly they blink and so on and so forth. I think the nice thing about the Arduino sort of language
Hmm.
is that they have a lot of libraries to make the stuff, nice and easy for beginners.
Hmm.
And then later on, I did more and more stuff. I'm still sort of in the process of finishing this project with a family friend of ours, but we decided it would be cool to build a remote control lawnmower, and so that's what we were doing one summer. And so essentially, with that, we were using Arduino as well as some XB radios, so that essentially two Arduino boards could communicate with each other, and
Okay.
then that would be controlled via remote control.
Okay. And what I know is Raspberry Pi a little bit better. And Raspberry
Yep,
ships with the GPIO, where you can actually control very easily the pins.
yep,
Is this Arduino
same
the
idea.
same idea? And why you prefer Arduino over Raspberry?
I think that's just what I started with. I do really
Okay.
like Raspberry Pi, and I do like that you could have like libraries like Pi4J to use it with Java.
Hmm.
But yeah, I just started with Arduino, and then I do have a Raspberry Pi and have used it in the past as well.
Okay. What happened then? I mean, you stick with Arduino, or you started to do something on the PC?
Yeah, so I did, more and more electronics projects as well as programming, and eventually took more programming classes in high school. I took AP Computer Science, which was taught in Java.
What
That's
is
where I fell in
AP?
love with Java.
What is AP?
Advanced placement. It's a sort of collection of courses,
Okay.
advanced courses that are taught, across the U.S.
Okay. And
Yep.
you started with Java then, you say?
So in terms of programming courses, I started with C++
Okay.
and then took the Java course.
Okay. And which Java version was it?
Back then it was Java 8,
Wow.
but but the thing is that the actual course didn't really introduce many Java 8 features.
Hmm.
I actually discovered those on my own, running into a video from Brian Goetz discussing the features of Java 8 and how they were implemented, which is what sort of got me hooked on Java.
Incredible. So you started with Java 8. I think none of my guests started with Java 8. You are the first one.
Good to know.
Yeah. More than Java. Okay.
Yes,
And you like Java or at school or
I
what?
do. I like it a lot. Yeah.
But why?
It's a good question. I think the programming model is very nice to work with. You don't have to worry about things like memory allocation. And, I'm a big fan of strong static typing, which is probably because that's what I started with. And really, the community is just amazing. There's so many people on so many different backgrounds and so many resources that it's just, an amazing thing to be involved in and to work on day to day.
But the Arduino community or PHP community is also okay, or is it smaller than Java?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Hmm.
Once I got hooked in Java, I just sort of, did more and more research and got more and more ingrained in the community. But, you can find a lot of people that are interested in the sort of hobbyist electronics and so on and so forth. So, but yeah, got hooked on Java and haven't really looked back.
Okay, what happened then? So you started with Java 8 at school, so you did
Yep.
maybe some sorting, like, bubble sort, I guess, right?
Yes.
Quick sort.
Yeah, yeah. Yep. Yeah, and just going through the sort of object-oriented principles. So
Vehicles.
inheritance.
Vehicles.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and going through those and, interfaces and inheritance and all those sort of, basic introductory Java concepts.
Were there
And so,
actually good use cases and explanation? Like, the interface really you said, okay, this is useful, or were just, how to call it? Just
yeah.
artificial, yeah, what I don't like, of course, is sometimes you have to do something and no one
Hmm.
knows why. Or what
Yeah.
was what was your perception?
Yeah, I mean, if I don't remember explicitly what some of the examples were. I think some of them were the ones that you said,
Hmm.
interface animal, class dog,
Yeah.
implements animal. But I don't think I really understood the true power of interfaces until later on. But I think, the course did a good job of introducing me to Java early, because later on when I went to college, the first class was taught in Java. And then that sort of gave me a head start on those concepts and going deeper.
Okay, so you went to college. You said it right now?
Yes, I did.
In Chicago?
Yep. I did not. So I went into Purdue University, which is in West Lafayette, Indiana.
Okay, and you enjoyed it the time?
Yes, yeah, it was great.
And you did Java, so you stick with Java or other programming languages. What's the story there?
Yeah, so I studied computer science there, and so the introductory course is in Java, and then other courses, it can vary from semester to semester. Like for my algorithms course, that was taught in Java, but some of my other courses, like compilers and operating systems, are taught in C or C++.
Okay,
so it can vary.
So what I understood, so you started at school with Java 8, then you watched a video with Brian Goetz, and you enjoyed his video and Java 8 features. So what do you like the most in Java 8? So which features you say this is great, or why the video changed your perception?
Yeah, I really thought the lambda expressions, I think, were the major feature of Java 8, and those were very interesting. I thought it was cool that I could still use them in my class in high school, and it didn't seem like many other people knew that they existed. But really, I think what got me interested even more is that Brian sort of went through how they were able to add lambdas to Java. And so adding things like default methods to interfaces allowed them to support things like adding streams to the existing collections.
Okay.
And so just him walking through, sort of the design decisions and the options in front of them and why they chose what they did was really interesting.
Okay. And this is why you like Java even more.
Yes, yeah. And just I discovered after that a whole ton of more talks, and I feel like I'm always on YouTube looking at talks from different Java superstars in my eyes, and learning a lot of new things. There's just so much rich content out there and a lot of great community.
Okay, cool. So at university, you programmed something interesting with Java, or you just you were happy to do the assignments, or what's the story at the university?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, a lot of the assignments were, I think, interesting. There was some stuff that I hadn't done previously in regards to like networking that were interesting for some of the introductory projects. But throughout my whole time there, I did one of the projects, which was not in Java, but in C, is implementing your own shell and adding on to this operating system called Xenu, which was created by one of the Purdue faculty members. But yeah, I think there was a lot of interesting projects that sort of helped me and prepare me for industry.
Okay. And what you did at the industry after university? So what happened then?
Yeah, so after I graduated, I went into industry to be a software engineer. I got hired at a company called Realty Ads, which is located in Chicago. And so what they do is essentially ad tech in the commercial real estate space. Unfortunately, Realty Ads doesn't use Java, so my first job was using PHP.
Okay, so you are sad, or not?
A little bit, yeah. A little bit, yeah. But I could still do Java, outside of work, because I still do work on personal projects. But yeah, certainly PHP is not Java.
But what I know, they have an interesting framework called Laravel, right?
Laravel, yeah. Yep.
And it changed everything because PHP was actually not that popular anymore, and I think the new framework changed everything. So it seems like it is now. It was like the revival of PHP, right?
Yeah, exactly. I haven't used Laravel myself. I've played with a little bit of code snippets and seen some usage of it. The company that I worked for did not use Laravel, but yeah, it's definitely interesting seeing how PHP has sort of been inspired by other languages, because there's code that you can write in later PHP versions that is eerily reminiscent of Java code.
Yeah, this is what I noticed. Even Germany at the conferences, what they did, lots of the Java patterns were available in PHP.
Yes.
They are crazy because, the entire argumentation back then was like Java is type safe and this is not cool and boring and strict. And therefore you have to use JavaScript or Ruby, duck typing, or, PHP where it can be, you can do whatever you like and it's not so strict.
Yeah.
And then I wondered myself, why then every language tries not to replicate what Java did? So if you are happy, happy with the dynamic behavior, then, don't even try to replicate what Java does. Try to be different, because otherwise, what's the point? And this was interesting to watch over the years. So because the entire argumentation was also strange. it was, I think, before your time. So as JavaScript became really, it started with Ruby actually, duck typing, right? They say, okay, type safety, not a problem because we write more unit tests. I say, okay, this is strange.
Yeah.
Why you all write so many unit tests just, to replicate the type safety? And in JavaScript, exactly the same in argumentation. This type safety is not good. And then TypeScript happened. And I say, okay, then why are you doing TypeScript? Because TypeScript is type safe, right? So this is like a completely strange argumentation. This is what funny.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, I think, one of the things I did miss in PHP was that type safety. And they've added, ways that you can sort of add type safety. I think there's like a enable strict types flag, but it still doesn't give you exactly what you want in Java. Like I remember being very annoyed when maybe a API we were using from like Google and so on and so forth, they would change their API and remove a method. And PHP would just let you continue running that code. And if you tried to invoke a method that didn't exist, it would fail at runtime. Versus Java, if you try to invoke a method that doesn't exist, it'll fail at compile time. And so it's just like differences like that kind of annoyed me. And I was missing being able to use Java for instances like that.
What I know, this what you're explaining right now, it was a major feature of, I don't know about PHP, but Groovy did it, and Ruby and the other dynamic languages. There was like methods missing. So what you can do, you can capture, the exception, and you can invoke a method which doesn't exist. But then exception happens, and in the exceptions you have the parameters and method name. And with that, you can actually generate code or use reflection or do something. So what they did, they implemented parser with it. So if you parse something, there's lots of stuff which doesn't exist. So you can, invoke behind the scenes and fill let's hash map or a data structure. So you can, understand document by invoking not existing methods. So this was a major pattern in the dynamic languages.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I could see uses for it like that. But yeah, I definitely like the strong static type of Java.
So and you still are doing Java right now, or you still stick with PHP?
So I was at that company for about a year and a half. And so back in sort of September, October, an old classmate of mine from Purdue reached out to me about interviewing with his startup that surrounds commercial electric vehicle charging. And so I interviewed with them and got the job and started in November, and happy to say that they're using Java. And then one other sort of minor point is that my CTO wanted to make sure that I said that Synop is hiring. So you could go to synop.ai, and there's a careers link to see the available jobs.
Very good. So give me this to the show notes. So I will put it. And in our Discord server, I created a channel, jobs.
Yeah,
just
great.
Just put to the jobs, and of course, right? So we promote it. So we put it in the show notes. So give me this, and and you already. So we have a channel to the listeners. It's called the Airhacks Discord server. It is open, so you can just register. Or Chicago Java User Group is also there. You are from Chicago Java User Group, and then we have a channel, jobs. So Logan, you can just put your job inquiry, and just do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so you're working for the company right now.
Yep, that's correct.
November this last year you started?
Yes, November 2022. Yep.
Wow. Okay, so you are a very young developer. So this is interesting that you're actually still excited with Java.
Yeah. It does seem interesting because in talking to, I guess, other people my age, it definitely does seem like there's a lot of interest in other languages like Python. But, I really just, like I said, fell in love with Java pretty early on. I've kept up with it and just really like, the changes that they're making to the language and virtual machine, as well as the community aspect of it.
Why the startup uses Java?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think, I haven't actually asked this, but there's probably some familiarity there. My old classmate, was also from Purdue and probably, also like Java. And I think, in terms of providing robust, scalable code, I think Java is a great option for that versus other languages out there.
Yeah. And what is the tech stack? What are you doing? What are you building right now?
Yeah, so Synop works on smart charging software for electric vehicle fleets in the commercial space. So you could think of a fleet of mail trucks or Amazon trucks. If they're electric, you need a way to charge them. And so a lot of these companies will have sites or depots that hold chargers. And so what our software does is communicate with those sites and depots using a protocol called OCPP. And so what we do is try to charge those vehicles efficiently and make sure that, they have enough power for their trip. An interesting addition to this is the sort of concept called V2G, vehicle to grid. And so in some instances, these electric vehicles, since they're just batteries on wheels, can push data back, or push energy rather, back into the grid and help the grid if it's under pressure. So, when everyone comes home at the end of the day and is turning everything on and using a lot of electricity, these vehicles that are just sitting idle and hold, energy in their batteries can push that back into the grid. So it's very bleeding edge stuff, and I'm still learning a lot, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, this is also a good problem, or good problem solver, because the size of a battery in an electric vehicle is actually huge. So if you compare it, with the home battery, it's just, the vehicle is orders of 2 to 10 times more capacity than a home battery. And you can, charge your vehicle if the sun shines, and it comes at night, you can discharge your vehicle. And
exactly.
Yeah, and this is actually a perfect idea. And interesting. So, on which is it running in the cloud, or where your software is running?
Yeah, so we're using AWS, and so some of our employees come from AWS itself. So I'm sure there's some familiarity there. But yeah, we're running in AWS, and then tech stack wise, using Java, of course, and mostly Spring Boot as well as some Micronaut.
Okay. And Lambda and Fargate, I guess, right?
Yep, exactly. Lambda and then ECS with Fargate. Yep.
And no EKS?
Not at this point, as far as I know, but I'm sure we'll get there one day.
Hopefully not. I mean, Fargate and Lambda is far simpler than EKS. Yeah. So this was, I'm glad this is also my choice. And yes, now I understand why you're using Java, because just Fargate and Lambda are mostly serverless, and Java is fast. And if Java is fast, you can save money, because the scripting languages will execute slower. So this is a business case for using Java. Very cool. So why I invited you is I had a session at Chicago Java User Group, and just about, I forgot what was actually the title, but you asked a lots of good questions. Not only asked questions, so you actually answered all the questions, from the attendees. I say, this is incredible. Who is it? And it's okay, it's Logan. So okay, then I have to invite you to chat with you, because your answers were very good, and it was lots of fun. By the way, the entire Java User Group experience in Chicago was really nice. So there were lots of really nice attendees, and it was really a very pleasant experience for me as a speaker. And really enjoyed the entire thing.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. I guess I was a little surprised, because you've had a lot of Java rock stars on that I look up to: Lucas Eder of Juke, Graham Rocher of Micronaut and Grails. And so thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, interesting guest, right? So I also using CDK. If you can talk about your project now, or is it lots of NDAs? So can we talk about your stack, or?
Yeah, for sure. We could talk about it, and I will just preface that I'm still relatively new to the company and learning. But yeah, no worries there.
Are you using CDK, Cloud Development Kit, to provision the?
It's a good question. I think I'm not sure if we're using it anywhere in the company. I at least haven't used it in my instances thus far. I know we have looked into using Pulumi in some small cases for right now. And so that's been interesting. I think, that's something I'm going to at least look into personally, but it's really interesting that you can sort of have that infrastructure as code and sort of have a Java API for that kind of stuff. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, today I've worked the entire day on the CDK, on a pipeline and the backend. So and the interesting part is, if it's a Java, everything, you can, so with the CDK, just to give you an example, so you can share, the pieces of the infrastructure using
Yep.
Maven
Mm-hmm.
or even S3. So what we are
Yeah.
doing, this CDK, you can use Maven and compile it and run it,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't have to always compile it. What you can also do, you
Yep.
can create a jar, push it to S3, download it to the pipeline, and just run it with Java -jar. And this is so what it means. You have one jar, and this is the entire definition of your microservice or app.
Yeah.
You run it and you have it, per account. So it's actually really nice
That's
Java
cool.
Java experience, really cool and very
Yeah.
simple and lightweight. So this was what I mean. It is obvious, but somehow there are almost no examples about that. So
Yeah.
it is very, very easy to do, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And what are you implementing right now in Java? So what is your task currently?
So I'm currently working with this company called Genability, who has APIs. And so one of the things I'm working on is time of use. And so with that, there is essentially different time periods throughout the day or over the course of a year where there are different rates associated with the cost of energy. And so I'm essentially communicating with their APIs and pulling some data back. It's really interesting how, APIs for some of these things exist. Like, there are things like this or things like CO2 emissions where I wouldn't think an API to calculate some of these things exists, and then I found out that they actually do.
And which data store are you using?
So we're using MySQL Aurora in AWS for the most part. I think we also might be using some document databases and Redis to cache some things in some instances, but I've mostly been interacting with MySQL.
So serverless? So Aurora serverless or just the Aurora thread?
Yep. I don't remember, to be honest. I think it might be the serverless. But yeah, just MySQL Aurora.
Yeah, because MySQL is MySQL. It doesn't matter. You can just use it. And and the serverless is a little bit more interesting because what happens then, you can almost shut it down, right? But in your case, if there is constant load, a regular RDS is even cheaper.
Yeah.
Now, maybe Micronaut. Are you also using Micronaut?
Yeah, so we are using Micronaut in some instances, which is interesting. I've been looking at Micronaut for a little while now and do find the approach of it incredibly interesting. Mm-hmm. I know it's been around for a little while. I think it showed up maybe in 2017 or 2018. Yeah. And so the approaches that it uses are incredibly interesting. In terms of the sort of ahead of time annotation processing, as well as the integration with GraalVM.
What's really interesting is Micronaut uses annotation processors or the annotation processors or compiler extensions processor, right?
Yep.
And what it means at build time, they are generating code from annotations to prevent reflection. But if you think about this, because they do it at build time, they have like reflection-like capabilities with code generation. This is the strange part, To give you an example, if a Micronaut can connect to a database, right? So to a table, and read the metadata, and then read, the annotation metadata, and then that, the mapping is not right between your entity and the table. But this is build time. And, a few years ago, the Java E servers did the same at runtime with reflection. Mm-hmm. So what's really fascinating is you can use something like Micronaut, which is type safe, and have identical features to dynamic behavior 10 years ago at build time. And the only difference is, what Quarkus and Micronaut are doing, they're saying, okay, instead of doing the deployment at runtime, we do it at build time, and therefore they can get rid of reflection. This is the crazy part.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like I've heard Graham Rocher talk about that, and the sort of compile time type checking of queries is really interesting. And it also makes me think about Juke, because that's one of the things you get from using Juke as well. But yeah, the approaches that they're doing are really interesting. And I guess I'm curious, how their adoption will go in the coming years.
I mean, Micronaut and Quarkus, the adoption has to be higher if company notices how much money they can save, I mean, this is just about business. And I would say what really changed in the recent 5 years is that now everything is about costs. If you're in the cloud, the major driver are costs. And you know it already. I mean, there are maybe 20, 30 services on AWS where you can run Java, from App Runner, Lightsail, EC2, Fargate, then the ECS, and everywhere.
Yep.
Even code build, you can run batch processing.
Yep.
So it is really everywhere. And the only difference are the costs.
Yes.
If EC2 runs entire time, and you can fully utilize it, this is cheaper. If you run it serverless entire time, it's going to be more expensive. So the main decision what you take are costs and the use profile. And therefore, Micronaut and Quarkus have to be more successful. Except, the company has endless budget, but this doesn't make sense in the cloud.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. And it definitely seems like, Spring, which is the big player in the game, is catching up in some regards to some of the novelties of Micronaut and Quarkus. I know they had the Spring Native project for a little while, and now they have in Spring Boot 3 and Spring 6 sort of first-class support for GraalVM. So I'm just sort of curious how that'll play out in the coming years.
Maybe. But the interesting part is what we are saying here about Spring Boot, Micronaut, and Quarkus is only interesting for AWS Lambdas, which are exposed via HTTP API gateway. It means, someone calls us from outside, and Micronaut and Quarkus, what I do in Quarkus, I use my micro profile JAX-RS, and Spring Boot uses different APIs. But the idea is that the cloud event gets extracted and parsed. So the HTTP API gateway event gets parsed by Quarkus, is what I know, and then the API is called without reflection. Micronaut does the same, and even with JAX-RS, exactly the same API to Quarkus, and this is very efficiently. So today, actually, I implemented a Lambda which is asynchronous. This is just invoked by an event without HTTP, and I didn't even use Quarkus. So in this Lambda, I have to store something to S3, so I just have a POJO with S3 API without any additional framework. So I don't care about Spring Boot, I don't care about Quarkus, about nothing. I just have a POJO. So I would say the frameworks in the cloud could become less important for true event-driven Lambdas. And the only importance is for the HTTP API Lambdas. And even in these cases, it's not like we're building huge logic. So we can use some dependency injection. But, it's a different story, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
So why you are using Spring Boot and Micronaut at the same time?
Yeah, I think I'm not entirely sure why that was the case. I think that was decided upon before I got there.
Okay.
The company or the engineering team itself is split up into pods, essentially, so smaller teams inside of it. And so the pods are essentially in charge of some of the decisions about, what technologies and frameworks and so on and so forth to use. Spring and Micronaut have been the two contenders in terms of application frameworks.
Yeah, but it's really strange that you're using both at the same time, right? So this is what interesting. And usually,
we've used. I feel like the majority of usage is Spring Boot with some Micronaut sprinkled in.
What's also interesting is Helidon framework. Because it is also Oracle and Micronaut is also from Oracle, and there is some cross-pollination. So the Helidon also picks some data from some features from Micronaut.
Yes.
And Helidon, they have already NEMA, the Loom, what you mentioned, also Chicago Java user group. This is less interesting for Lambda and more interesting, for Fargate maybe, if you have more power in the runs entire time. Because what it will mean is you will be able to start, lots of threads, millions of threads on a stock micro-profile JAX-RS application. Also very interesting news, very fresh ideas.
Yeah, for sure. It does seem like a lot of the application frameworks are looking at this closely. I believe Micronaut has said they are, as well as Spring. So it's exciting times for sure.
Yeah, and Micronaut and Spring, they are using, they are working with Oracle engineers, to do that because it's the same company. So what are the features of Java you're most excited about? Java 17, 19, 21 and beyond. So what are you really looking forward to?
Yeah, so I think right now the ones that I use, at least in personal projects, that I really like are text blocks and records. In terms,
what was the second one? Text blocks I got. What was the next one?
Records.
Records. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really great. I think, text blocks are nice if you're writing multi-line strings. In some cases, if I was like maybe doing a JDBC query or something to do some tests, it's really nice to be able to write that in a multi-line string.
Yes.
And records are great for many use cases. It sort of eliminates the need for Lombok, which I know some people like. I prefer not to use it. And so records make that really nice if you want to have like immutable data classes per se.
Also my opinion.
But yeah, there are others. Yeah. It does seem kind of so the issue I have is that some people seem to be stuck on Java 11, which don't introduce any of those features yet. And so I know AWS, for instance, I think for Lambda, they don't have first class support for JDK 17, which is kind of interesting. And so that has limited some from using those features.
What we are using, you can use the Java 17 layer in Lambda, and you get Java 17 support. It works really well. And in one point of time, Java 17 is going to be released, and then you can remove the Lambda layer, the Java 17 layer, and then just use those.
Yeah, I've meant to look into that. I haven't at this point, but I know that's been a sort of complaint about some that they haven't released first class support yet, and it's interesting given that the next LTS release, JDK 21, is right around the corner.
Yeah, I think they would like to do a little bit more than just upgrading the Java version, so they're waiting for the opportunity, or they have the opportunity right now to, move the entire platform. This takes a little bit longer, I think.
And going back to the Java language features, on the horizon, I'm really excited about the pattern matching capabilities that they're adding. Mm-hmm. I know they started with pattern matching for instance of, which is really nice. Mm-hmm. But I'm really excited to see the sort of deconstruction patterns that you'll be able to write. That's going to be really cool. And then the big project that I think we're all waiting for some first deliverables for is Project Valhalla.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So what we have right now is the pattern matching for instance of. And this is already useful if you are building simple visitors, maybe, visitor patterns. So what you can do is, let's say you have a method with the object, and then you can say if object instance of car, right? Then car, and then you can say instance of car, and then immediately C, car C, and the C becomes a variable which is available in the block. So you can save one line of code, which is already nice, and the destructuring, I think they call it different. So the term destructuring comes from JavaScript, and I think they call it deconstruction, right? Deconstructors. Okay, what's in JavaScript is already in JavaScript. Is really cool how it looks in JavaScript. But my problem with JavaScript in Java is, in Java I use var everywhere.
Yes.
And in JavaScript I replace all my vars with let, right? Let. Yes, let. I always confuse.
I like to use const as well.
Yeah, const. Of course, you use const. Wherever possible, and then if it breaks, then fall back to let. But you would say something like const curly brackets and say name, and if in the JSON or in JavaScript object there's like a hash map, right? If there is a key name, it will pick the value and assign it to the variable name. So you save a lot of code. And what they can do similarly with records, because they are immutable, so the idea is going to be the same with records. So on the left side you have a record, and you can deconstruct parts of the records and assign it to variables, which is going to be huge. Because
it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, because what you can do then, right? You can read, you can deserialize data from a table into records, and then you can destructure or deconstruct the record into a subset and just use it without any getters, setters, nothing, right? And this is going to be huge, but it is not available now, right? So this is,
Yeah, they have had, I think, a couple of rounds of preview for doing pattern matching in Switch, and so you could essentially have case labels that use the patterns like you can do it in instance of. And I think they're also in the next release going to be previewing record deconstructors in instance of, which will be really interesting. And then I think, over time, I think it's meant to be more broader in that if you want to use a deconstructor, you could use it sort of as a statement, as if you were declaring a variable, but you're deconstructing instead. And I know eventually they'll allow you to write your own deconstructors for your own classes that aren't necessarily records. So it's a really, really rich feature, and I'm really excited to see, what comes out at the very end.
Yeah, it is going to be big. I would say the
Yep.
deconstruction. I think it is going to be bigger than. It's the same category. I would almost say like Java streams, right? So I would say it is.
It's going to be awesome.
This is this. I would say the next big step after Java 8, right? Because Java 11, some kind of interesting. Java 8 was huge. Java 11,
yes,
nice, but it's not like as huge as Java 8. This is also why lots of projects just never moved away from Java 8. So there's no reason to go to Java 11. For me, it's lots of reasons, but VAR is great, and HTTP client are great. Java 17 records, text blocks, also my opinion, and we have now the pattern magic for instance of, which I use.
And switch.
Switch expressions
have also been great.
Switch expression.
I love using those. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
To the listeners, how they look like, a switch expression means that the switch returns something, and which usually returns, right? But what we did back then is we had a switch with return statements. So and now you can say var, let's say car equals switch, and in the switch you have a nice syntax where every label is called in the case, right? Every label returns something with one liner, and and if you use it has to be complete, so the compiler checks whether all the cases are covered. Otherwise you get either suggestions from your IDE, means this is not covered, which happens with Visual Studio Code, or you get compiler error. Which IDE are you using? I'm curious.
I use IntelliJ.
Okay, this is what I suspected. I thought maybe Visual Studio Code, because I'm using Visual Studio Code for 2 years right now, and I'm really happy. So I'm actually impressed how well it works.
Yeah, I keep meaning to check it out, and I'll probably have to use it for a longer period of time. I have used it in spurts before, and also IntelliJ, or JetBrains rather. They are introducing a Fleet IDE, which looks a lot like Visual Studio Code, which is interesting.
I'm curious what happens with it, because
indeed,
I don't know. This is a good idea to replicate what Visual Studio Code does, because Visual Studio Code is huge, and I think IntelliJ looked nice as it looked, and Visual Studio Code is different. So to make it look like Visual Studio Code and do it with Kotlin, I don't know what it's. And I had chat with lots of IntelliJ developers, and there is no one so far was really excited about Fleet. So I'm
and they also changed the UI of IntelliJ, which I found interesting. I sort of like the redesign, but it seems like some don't like it, some do like it. But the redesign of IntelliJ itself does look a bit more like VS Code. But they do have the sort of separate Fleet editor that I think is trying to be more like VS Code.
There's one killer feature of Visual Studio Code which is less important to you, I think. But what I do with Visual Studio Code is I have an alias. It is very easy to open a folder in a project, and it opens immediately. I can work, and it can open multiple Visual Studio Codes per folder. And this is a little bit more friction with IntelliJ. So in IntelliJ, I think it's more interesting if you spend more time in a project, in a single project. If you have to switch, too often between projects and between even microservice, whatever, then I would say Visual Studio Code is a little bit less friction. This is at least my observation.
That makes sense.
What about Loom? Excited or not so excited?
Very excited. I think, it's an interesting project, and I'm interested to see how these frameworks adopt it. Like we talked about Nema. That's really interesting, and I definitely need to play around with it. But it definitely seems like we're still in the first innings of Loom. I know we had the preview in 19, and they're doing another preview in 20. And then there's also with it, I still need to read the JEP, but I know that Ron Pressler has talked about structured concurrency, which sounds really interesting. So a lot of exciting stuff.
You know why I'm excited about Loom?
No more reactive?
Yeah, exactly. Because in all projects, I get the first question, what's about reactive programming or whatever? I'm saying, hey, come on, for our project, we really don't need it. And now I have even one argument more. I can say, okay, with I know Loom is coming, and if Loom comes, we will have to probably throw away our reactive, circus and just use Loom. So I
Yeah.
would say reactive programming is great for reactive use cases, but if
Yep.
just as general purpose programming, I call HTTP API and really wait for the response. For me, it is just pointless, to use reactive API for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's really interesting, and that sort of discussion will be interesting to see how that plays out. I remember, so I went to a conference in Chicago called jconf.dev, and I was able to see Venkat Subramaniam, and I did ask him about this, and I think the quote he said is that Loom will scale your servers, whereas reactive will scale your services. So it seems like, I don't think reactive will go away totally, but I think Loom will, be able to cover many of the use cases that we see day to day.
Yeah. Loom reactive will not go away. For instance, a very simple. I'm surprised that are you not using Kafka streaming or Kinesis, something like this.
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Because Kafka, what it means is Kafka looks like a Java stream, which is alive, right? So if you have a collection like an array, so you can iterate over it, then it's over, right? But in Kafka, you have a topic, and you get live events, and then on the Java side you have a data structure. So if event appears, you get called back. So it's like instead of pull, it's push. And for this use cases, reactive is great because the data structure is reactive. So this makes sense if you're implementing WebSockets or something with streams, Kafka, Kinesis. This can make sense. And but this is a natural or if you're building UIs and you move your mouse, then events are happening, and you can react to these events. So this is a perfect case for reactive programming. But in my boring enterprise project, this is not very very common, right? So we are calling something and waiting for the response. If I call the database, you have a couple of concurrent threads. There is pointless, to use reactive programming for it.
Yeah, it's exciting, and the Loom stuff is exciting, and sort of a return to imperative programming.
Perfect. Anything else you would like to mention or ask or discuss?
No, I mean, I think, thanks for inviting me on. It's, being a Java developer nowadays is incredibly exciting. I think there's a lot of stuff in the language and, frameworks that are very exciting. Definitely looking forward to listening to more episodes of your podcast. But yeah, thanks for inviting me on.
What I can tell you is I started with Java JDK 1.0, and my entire my idea was to learn various programming languages. But the problem is the Java is so big and so interesting, it's really hard to keep up. So I'm really happy with Java. And if you learn new stuff, I can learn incrementally, but still it never gets boring. And what's interesting also for my clients, I have a project which are 15 years old, and my clients still like it because it was backward compatible. And this is why the Brian Goetz and the others, they are just geniuses, that because they have to add new features without breaking stuff. And this is a huge selling point. And this is actually the interesting balance, between being modern but still interesting for larger enterprises and even startups. See, a startup is using Java, and it still works, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think they go through great pains to make sure that they don't break backward compatibility, and default methods are a great example of that. And I just I thank them for the work they do every day, and I try to keep up with what they're doing by reading the mailing list and listening to their talks and so on and so forth.
You have to be careful, otherwise you get hired by Oracle, and you have to work with them then,
Time will tell, I guess.
Perfect. Where people can find you, Do you have a Twitter or?
Yeah. So my Twitter is @LB Kalinsky, LB in my last name. I am on Twitter. Twitter is kind of interesting now with what's going on. I'm also on Mastodon. I guess I could also share my username and instance there. It'd probably be easier to include that in the show notes. But yeah, Twitter and Mastodon are where I usually am. I also am on Reddit, and so I like to post and comment in the Java subreddit, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, those are the three main places. And
you're in the Chicago Java User Group server, right? As well, very active.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I am a member of the CJUG. We do have our Discord server, which we post about events and have other discussions. So you can find me there as well. and also in the AirHacks Discord.
Perfect. Well, we'll post your job, inquiry.
Yeah, sounds great.
Thank you a lot.
Yeah, thank you.